to show like when we follow more of a demand generation philosophy or approach, we're actually driving toward these revenue numbers versus these MQLs that we're just churning out through these webinars. They aren't converting, right? So I'm showing them what converts, what doesn't. And at the end of the day, your CEOs, your CMOs, your C-suite, they care about revenue. So as long as you can show them that impact on revenue, I found that to be quite successful.
Welcome to another episode of the Growth League podcast. I'm your host, Caleb Clark, and I have the privilege of speaking to Anna Murphy today. She's the Director of Marketing at LiveSchool. Anna, welcome to the show. I appreciate you being here.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
So, you have it says anyways, you have over 8 years experience partnering with different edtech companies in order to kind of create their user-centered products, hone their brand, how it shows up in the world, developing marketing systems that ultimately help fulfill the mission and the vision of those organizations. So tell me, what drew you to edtech?
Yeah, so I'm actually a former educator. I worked at the Boys and Girls Club managing their after school programming and summer school programming, doing curriculum planning for them, and then actually delivering that content, as well as working with some other educational organizations that partnered with the public schools in the area to provide interventions to predominantly English language learners. So I worked in education, very mission driven, passionate about it. And I had an opportunity one summer to work at an internship at an education technology company in Portland, Oregon, where I was living at the time. And, it paid me a little bit more than teaching did, which is not saying much in the US, but so I was like, maybe I can get out of my parents' basement. So I took the job. And it was actually really in their customer support department mostly. But I just ended up really enjoying the company and started contributing to their blog. Again, having had experience in education, they were a curriculum company, and that was what my specialty was curriculum writing for English language learning content areas. So I ended up staying on and slowly started to manage their blog. Then from there, that became other website pages. So then I moved from customer support to marketing full time. At that point, it was a really weird journey, but have just stayed within ed tech ever since. I find marketing fascinating, but I don't think I would personally enjoy doing it outside of the education space, because at the end of the day, my job is to reach teachers and principals. These were folks I worked with for a long time. They're some of my best role models too, just from having grown up, that I just feel so connected to the education space. So that's what's brought me to edtech and what's really kept me within edtech. And I think it's a special group of people that you get to work with across the revenue organization at edtech companies, because there really is that sense of, being aligned to the mission and seeing that result come to life within schools and oftentimes among those really vulnerable populations, which is where I work. So being able to make an impact there is really important to me.
That's so cool. I actually haven't spoken to anyone yet on this series who, started with a passion for the industry and then married, a marketing discipline to that. I think that's really cool and unique. And, for an organization that has a marketing leader where that is the case, man, what an advantage.
Yeah. And it really is across our entire revenue organization. Every person on customer success, on marketing, and on the sales team, including, up to our CEO, are all former educators at the current company I'm at. And so there's just such that sense of alignment and passion for what we do. So it makes it a really special place to work. And, I found that at most ed tech companies as well. There's a lot of former educators who make it into those orgs.
That's really interesting. A lot of marketing leaders spend their first 4 to 12 months figuring out just the lay of the land as it relates to industry and the different people involved, where your advantage is you can get right to the ground running. I think that's awesome.
Yeah, exactly.
So when did the intersection of marketing come into your life? Was it after? Tell me about that.
Yeah, so it was at that internship when I started contributing to their blog. They had been blogging for a while, since before it was cool. And now it's, not as cool to keep doing, but I do actually see a ton of value in blogs. I'd love to talk about SEO, but I just started contributing to the blog. There was no sense of a keyword strategy or anything. And they didn't really have anyone managing it. And so anyone at the company could really write a blog, and then it was just kind of published, and they were all focused on topics, again, related to curriculum. They were essentially doing top of funnel marketing without that being some sort of dictated strategy they had. So I ended up raising my hand, and, I was a research assistant in college for some professors. So I did a lot of copy editing, and I was like, well, maybe I could start editing the blogs. And they were like, okay, you own it now. And, as it happens at small companies, essentially, which was great. And so I ended up just editing blogs. People would submit them, but then, started to then, I was like, well, how do I know if these are working? I was just kind of curious. So got a hold of Google Analytics. I didn't have anyone guiding me, right? So I was just typing whatever I could think of into Google. There wasn't really a established content marketing org at this company.
Right.
And so ended up being like, wow, some of these are getting traffic. Like, why is that? And so then I discovered keyword strategy, took a HubSpot SEO course, was like, this is fascinating. And I think for me, I'm just a very data-driven person, and like getting to the roots of just understanding what's happening and what's causing like some trend we're seeing. And so that's what I think that's what really sparked that passion. And so, now I'm a director of marketing, but I still always bring, I think, a really strong background in content strategy, and especially SEO, to everything that I do. And that always ends up being a huge part of, the marketing playbook I put into action, quote unquote, at these companies. Of course, it's different and it's optimized for every company, but I really do believe in the power of content and SEO, though that's changed a lot over 8 years, what that looks like.
So every SEOer that I know, they believe in a world of intent, right? Where the audience out there is kind of milling about their lives, but they have intent, and it's at different levels of kind of exploding. It sounds like you're there.
Yes, definitely. I mean, I think, when I first started, this is like, I go back to, again, like that initial content strategy at the, when I first started managing that blog, they were like, oh, put a CTA at the bottom that invites them to set up to like talk to our sales team. I was like, okay, whatever. So I just did it. And I was like, that's a great idea. Like at the time, like, cool, we're going to get a ton of business. They didn't get any business from that, because none of them were coming there with that. If they were Googling like, what is concept-based curriculum, which is just an example of a keyword we would go after. They weren't looking to buy a solution to help them do that. They were just hoping to understand what this tool was, or what this pedagogy was for curriculum mapping, essentially. That doesn't make that keyword not valuable to go after, but it does make a sales CTA at the bottom pretty useless, and it's not really worth your time, right? And if that's what you're hoping to do to convert your traffic from keywords into revenue, like that's not going to be successful. So I mean, you're right, there is like this world of intent. And so when I map out these keyword pillars, right, we have high intent keywords, we have just research-based keywords where it's just really they're not coming with any sort of intent to buy from us, and we try to create content that's really optimized to what that keyword is telling us that they want, right? So if I think about like now at LiveSchool, we do something called PBIS. If they Google PBIS platform, I want us to rank for that, and that will be a product page. But if they Google what is PBIS or why should I do PBIS, they're going to get a blog that's not trying to sell them on LiveSchool. It's just trying to marry ourselves to their journey of studying PBIS. When they're ready to purchase a platform, which might be a year from now or 2 years from now, they know our brand, and there's that trust, right? It's the kind of the HubSpot playbook in that way, but I see it continue to work. I mean, SEO is our number one driver of direct revenue, which is what we associate as essentially like anything that's not from word of mouth. Right. And that was not the case a year ago when we were first starting this strategy, right? So we've we doubled new business last year, which was above where our forecast was. And the majority of that at the end was coming from SEO work we did to make sure we were ranking for these keywords that, we started prioritizing the higher intent keywords, because revenue was the goal right away. But in doing that, to be able to rank for those, we were also looking at those lower intent keywords that are related in those pillars that we would build out.
Interesting. Very interesting. How have you taken a preference towards a certain discipline like SEO in this case, and understanding the world as a world being full of intent of different degrees? How do you apply that specific discipline to a more holistic sort of approach that you've taken to leading a marketing function?
I love that question because I think it's, I think about there's all these different channels that we're operating on, right? And we have all these, like, I try to follow a, demand generation, right? That's how I'm measured. I won't work for an organization that still does lead generation. It's like a hamster wheel you can't get off
this
of.
form to get a
Yeah. And it's like, or, they sign up for a webinar and then that counts as a lead because we need to hit some MQL number and but again, that goes to this intent, right? So it's this idea, like the only way, so at LiveSchool, 100% of revenue is driven, or 100% of new business revenue is driven through marketing. There's not an outbound sales function.
Okay.
The only way that someone gets in front of our sales team is them raising their hand and saying, hey, I want a demo. That is intent, right? That is, they're telling us exactly what they want. I'm not going to assume intent any other time before that, right? So they sign up for a webinar. I'm not hitting them with a sales call right after that, right? Like, we're nurturing them. We'll let them know there's a solution. In some cases, when if the webinar is like about how to build a reward store, that is a solution that we provide. Like, by the way, if you need help doing this, we have a product that does this. If you want to talk to our sales team, go here. But I think intent is a lot about trusting the intelligence of your audience, right? Like, they know how to purchase a product. They know how to get a hold of you if they want to purchase your product. And so I think about that with all the different channels and programs that we put in place. And we're not going to be able to build an audience if all we're trying to do is go after the 1% of people in our market that are maybe actively buying for a product like ours, right? So that requires us to develop really holistic marketing programs that meet people all different parts of the buyer's journey and doesn't try to pigeonhole them into a demo request form artificially because it's some number we need to hit. So I think intent covers so much of what we do. And I think about, like, social media is a really big channel for us, especially TikTok. Surprisingly, a lot of educators are on TikTok. I guess unsurprisingly maybe, but it's a very popular channel. So we've had fun building that out. But when I think about social media, someone's scrolling, right? Like, they don't want to click off and go to your website. So the goal of social media isn't to get them to go, like, I think about our content strategy, we create a blog post and we're like, how do we promote this on social media? It's not a link to go read this blog post, right? It's like, how do we take the substance of this content and reformat it so that it works on TikTok? So go back to that blog of, like, what are PBIS points? That's a blog we have. We then have a TikTok that's like, hey, let's talk about what PBIS points are, right? So it's about, like, also catering. I think intent plays a huge role into how you cater content per channel too. And meeting your audience where they are and not trying to force them along some journey just because it helps you reach your goals.
Right. Oh, that's amazing. You said that you probably wouldn't be part of an organization that prioritized lead magnets and things like that. But for other marketers out there that share the same philosophy as you, and they're nodding their heads right now, it's not a super easy thing a lot of times to convince the organization to approach a we'll be there when you need us type approach. What thoughts do you have on how you might be able to build the case for that?
Yeah, and I've been at organizations like that and gone through those motions. And so I think it's just really nice going into an organization now where I'm not having to convince the CEO. Him and I actually met through LinkedIn and through Chris Walker's comment section, essentially being like two ed tech nerds who are really passionate about demand generation. That's how I met the CEO here. So it's really nice not having to go through those motions, but I have been there before and I have successfully done it. I mean, it's the advice out there that at the end of the day, you still have to hit the KPIs that, your directors or leaders have given you, right? So oftentimes I've reported to the CEO when they're still running lead generation, they have these MQL numbers or whatever, these different all these different KPIs that they've given us that aren't necessarily revenue. That's fine. I'll continue to try to hit those. But at the same time, what I'm doing is trying to show like, okay, looking at, I then take ownership and just go up to that revenue level. Like what is converting, right? Like what are those, what are the SQOs that are converting into close won revenue? What of the leads are becoming, or MQLs are becoming sales qualified opportunities? So essentially splitting the funnel and doing two different types of analyses on these data. And so that I'm hitting ultimately the numbers that I've been given to hit, but I'm trying to also drive toward revenue data and then presenting that to the CEO or CMO that I've worked for, and using this to show like when we follow more of a demand generation philosophy or approach, we're actually driving toward these revenue numbers versus these MQLs that we're just churning out through these webinars. They aren't converting, right? So I'm showing them what converts, what doesn't. And at the end of the day, your CEOs, your CMOs, your C-suite, they care about revenue. So as long as you can show them that impact on revenue, I found that to be quite successful. The challenge is oftentimes, I mean, we have really long sales cycles because of the way school budgets work in the US. So there's essentially like 3 months a year where we make 90% of our revenue, and then everything else is leading up to that. So it can take a year or two, right, to show that data. So I'm just meticulously track it, right, and report on it to them. But I found it to be quite successful when you can show that revenue impact at the end of the day, and they'll be bought in. And, you know, oftentimes they're holding you to those lead generation numbers because their board is, for example, right, like wanting to see that those leading indicators. That's essentially what an MQL is with lead gen. And so helping them also then educate the board is a big part of that job, for example, too. And so I try to have empathy for like, why are they asking this of me? And then we can come up with, I'll still report on MQLs, like even in a demand gen environment right now, I still report on MQLs because they are a leading indicator. They're showing us like, are we getting, do we believe we're going to get close to hitting our revenue goals, especially because again, as I said, revenue happens in 3 months a year. So there's so much we're doing those other 9 months, but those aren't the numbers that I'm being held to at the end of the day in terms of like what success looks like. It's whether or not those or the MQLs, it's whether or not those convert into revenue. So I think you can still report on those, but then run a demand gen system, and over time get your CEO, CMO on board and help them report the same way to their board too.
That's awesome. That the nugget to pull there is when you're in a scenario where you're trying to get buy-in on your marketing strategy and the way you're building the system, the quickest and most effective way to that is just show clearly how you are reverse engineered from the business case, and how do you provide the information they need to talk to the board. I mean, it's and you know, that's refreshing as a marketer, tying marketing systems to business cases. You can't go wrong, right?
Exactly. And it makes me a better marketer. I mean, I used to love MQLs to the point where I was like, I don't want to be held accountable to revenue because that's, you know, sales is the one closing it. What if sales doesn't do their job, right? Like there was this thing that I'm, you know, kind of a control freak. And so I wanted to only be measured against things like I had direct control over. And so if it was, you know, making that change, this was a few years ago, I had anxiety doing it. I understand why everyone at different levels of the company has anxiety with it, you know? And so I think there's a huge like empathy portion of it too. And that's probably the educator in me a little bit, but a little woo woo, but it has also forced me in the best way possible to work so closely with my sales counterparts, right? That now I'm in meetings where we're going over the sales handoff process, like how quickly sales is following up with these leads, what that follow-up looks like. We're involved in the sequences now that they're enrolled in, that there's so much marketing feedback into what's going on in sales now. And it's a really positive collaboration. So I think that there's so much strength across the revenue org because by everyone being held to those revenue numbers, it encourages that collaboration. And I think we're better when we all work together too. So it does, it requires change management. It requires, there's going to be ups and downs with that transition.
That's awesome. What's the biggest problem or challenge facing your marketing team right now?
Oh, it is it's tough. I would say it actually, this is probably, it has to do with customer usage. We also oversee our customer communications, our customer onboarding activation. We have customer, community programs, things like that. And usage, we've never been able to, there's a cap that we've hit in terms of the percentage of users we're able to get to log in, which makes sense in this is common in B2B. Your buyers are not necessarily your end users, right? Our buyers do use us, but it's teachers that are using us primarily day to day. So their principals buy it, or the superintendent buys it and then tells all the schools that they have to buy it. So there's another layer down, right? So there's now this demand generation strategy that we're actively, we spent the last 4 months pulling a ton of data on to try to build, but a demand generation for customers we're trying to do at this point, because we know that if a superintendent buys it, we have to motivate principals to, give the PD time and you're not going to do something unless your principal tells you to do it. And this would, this exists across like any enterprise sales and any enterprise sales you're doing. This isn't just specific to education technology. And the same goes for when a school buys it and then motivating teachers to use it, right? So it's like, how do our end users are so busy, uniquely, like teachers are just incredibly busy, right? So how do they fit this into their classroom process? It's also like, having been in a classroom, it's so hard to have a new tool that this is something you use daily, right? So how do we create systems that motivate people to use so that we can clear this monthly active user number, essentially, that we're trying to clear? And so that has been a major focus of our marketing team this entire year. And right now we're working on, we use a tool called intercoms. We're building out an entirely new onboarding experience, because it used to be like we would just tell you to log in and you get access to our help center.
Right.
Now it's like we're doing pop-ups and tooltips, and marketing's owning all of this and building out this journey. And there's videos that like, hey, welcome, like here's why you should be excited to use this, obviously framed a little bit better, getting them to like click on the right things, give those points to students. Again, it's a positive behavior platform, but I spent 4 hours this morning recording like training videos virtually via Riverside. So this is a huge challenge that we're facing. And the problem is that we essentially get one shot at it, right? With back to school.
Yeah, right.
And then, we can continue to try to drive that, but this is just again, the way that our industry specifically works. This all has to be ready by July 15th is essentially our drop dead date, because that's when schools start to go back, especially in like the south of the United States. Their start dates like beginning of August, so teachers start training 2 weeks before. And so it's this huge initiative, and then we essentially just have to put it out in the world, and we won't really know if it works until a few months later, when we can start to get that regular usage data out of it, see like anyway. So it's required just so much analysis, and we're having to make really big bets, and we're rooting those in data. So you and I were talking about Excel spreadsheets prior to this, and I've been living in these last few days, especially, but just to be able to make confident but untested bets at the end of the day. So that's really where we're focused right now, and just overall back to school, because we're recording this, in June. So back to school is coming up, and that's our opportunity to get customers using, but it's also our biggest opportunity to make a splash in the market. And 70% of all business we'll generate next year the pipeline will start being built in September of this year. So it's a lot of preemptive work you have to do in this industry, and then fingers crossed.
You can't validate those hypotheses until it's game time.
And that's why I mentioned those leading indicators matter. Like that's why I do look at MQL still, and I report on that. I know they're shown to the board, but what we're measured on, and ultimately our goal is revenue, and are those converting? So we look at those, but so it's the leading indicators become very, very important to us, but we can't be too reactive to those, because
Right.
They're just a leading indicator at the end of the day. They're not the ultimate
Right.
goal that we're going for.
So there's revenue attributed to initial software or solution acquisition, but then is there a customer lifetime value or revenue growth based
Yes.
on usership? Okay.
Yes. And marketing's measured against both, right? So
Right.
we own just as much of like new business revenue as we do renewal revenue, right?
Okay.
And
Okay.
we have our own internal metric that we use called dollars per monthly active user, because
Right.
referrals are a huge part of our business. And so that's also something we try to give to increase over time too. So as our monthly active users increase, which is that threshold I mentioned earlier, we also need we need them to have a positive experience in the product so that they then go and refer us to others. And so I always say like, it's a web of all these different connections, right? So I work so closely with our product counterpart, our success counterpart, and my sales counterpart.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's really cool. Um, as a marketing leader in your role now, what would you claim to be your top superpowers that you bring to the job, bring to your team, that you rely on heavily? You know, mentioned data as being one, but what are your superpowers as a marketing leader?
Yeah, I would say data, definitely. I love data. I, work with my team to help them build data skill sets as well, right? So that's a huge part of like I create growth plans for them. Data is and has always been for any team that I've built a big part of anyone's role, helping them be able, because I think once you are able to master like how you pull data, report on your efficacy, show impact, be able to optimize or iterate based off of what you're doing, that just increases your value so much uh, as an employee. And I always try to focus on helping the people on my team get to the next step in their career. I sometimes do like career coaching on the side for teachers, like very small, but like, so for me, that's so important is career development. And so that's a big part of like, I look at it too as like a liberating thing for them being able to take ownership of this data. Um, but the other superpower I would say is an absolute, like, I love our company's audience at the end of the day and the industry's audience, right? Because it's teachers. That's what I used to do. And I think that's one of the reasons why our marketing programs are so successful is I really try to meet them where they are and encourage my team to do the same. So we don't make assumptions about what they need or what they want or how they speak and how they think about the challenges they're facing. Like we root it in research, we root it in our own personal experience, and we're constantly looking at ways to improve how we connect with them. I think especially, I think this is especially unique to ed tech because ed tech right now has so much venture capital money. It's a lot of founders who've never been in the classroom who think
Right.
that they know how to teach better than a teacher, which is not true. It is an incredibly difficult job. And I think you mentioned your wife's a teacher. So I think you would agree with it being like truly requires like superheroes and so much talent to be able to do. Uh, and that's not something that I do in our marketing, right? To go after and be like what they're doing. Like, I don't try to make people think what they're doing is wrong. Try to help people think about like ways we can support and improve them, but like really meet them where they are. I think one of my favorite phrases that I say to my team all the time is that like I get 20 emails a week from teachers. Um, and in 90% of them, their signature is bright pink Comic Sans writing. We do not use Comic Sans, but that is who we're designing for. That is who we're messaging to, right? There's this like level of fun and playfulness and just like brightness, right? If you walk into a classroom, we're always like so decorated, like that's where we want to meet them. And so I always just encourage my team to try to think about like how the audience will receive it and not assuming anything about
Right.
them.
Oh, that's so, I mean, it takes like customer centricity to the next level when you've actually lived
Yeah.
and walked in those shoes, right?
Yeah. And but I've been out of it for so long that I know I'm no longer an expert in it, right? So it's like I'm always on the phone with customers talking to them. We do school visits, which are just so much fun to get to go see not just the product, um, brought to life and the impact it's having, but it's, teachers are really busy, so they tag you to like help out with like, you're like, a kid will like raise their hand and they'll be like, oh, can you get into it? Suddenly, like I'm brought back to 8 years ago, getting to like teach students, and just so fun.
That's amazing.
But I just constantly try to immerse myself in the audience to continuously like figure out where they are. And like some of that's, scrolling TikTok and looking at like the hashtag teachers of TikTok or principals of
Right.
TikTok, like, really fun part of my job. Right. But it's like just constantly trying to understand our audience.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the solution itself? Like what problems does this solve for
Yeah.
teachers? Yeah.
So yes, it is essentially a positive behavior points platform. So it's really basic. Student does something good in class, they get a point for it, right? A teacher sees it, gives them a point. The whole idea being that you have to recognize the good more than you point out the bad that students are doing, which makes sense. Like when you give feedback to someone on your team, they always say like, give them feedback for what they're doing well too. So the same thing, if like students are always just being called out for like not
Right.
raising their hand or getting up during class, it just becomes this really negative cycle. It's rooted in this like research-based framework called PBIS, positive behavior intervention support. So that's essentially what we do. It's very customized to schools. So each school builds out their own rubric. They could
That's
give
cool.
positive points and negative points, only positive points. They use it to track referrals to detentions, things like that. But what I love about it is that like it has a real impact. So we were visiting a school down in Texas that's in one of the poorest zip codes of the country. It's 90% free and reduced lunch. Majority of the students are from Spanish-speaking families. And with our product, they have reduced referrals by 82% and suspensions by 93%. Another school came to us, and within a year of using our product, they reduced chronic absenteeism by 10%. A rural high school in Arkansas saw referrals go down by 56%. A school in the Bronx, New York, they do these student surveys, increased students who felt like they belonged in the school community by 14% in a year. And so this has an impact on not just where we've seen the schools that work with us. So obviously improves student behavior, also improves teacher tenure then, right? Because there's so much, especially in the US, so many teachers are leaving that there are like, they can't even find subs anymore. There's such a teacher shortage. So it's helping to address that. It also too, like students feeling safe in their school community, like they belong, that reduces things like suicides, which is a huge problem among children these days. So it has such a positive impact on the overall school experience. And we've had schools come to us and we're working on validating, because we take this data very seriously. That's actually a big part of my role, is working with customers to track some of this data. But we've had schools that come to us and they've seen improvements in their standardized test scores, for example, NAEP scores, through our product, because more students are engaged and sitting in class and ready to learn and they want to be there, right? And so this product has such a positive impact on just the overall educational experience for both students and teachers and families too, because they see that difference with their students too when they come home and loved being at school that day. And so I love this product, because as a former educator, this was something I did, but with like paper bucks, I would just like print off for students, right? Or there's like, you can use those like clothespins and move it up like as students get points for their charts and things like that. But so anyways, that's what our product does. When students earn these points, we have a reward store that they can go, like schools run through our product, they can go shop in, or I guess I should say, schools also do really commonly house points, which is like Harry Potter, it's 40 for Gryffindor. Very similar. Students are assigned to houses, they earn those points, it goes to their house, and there's this big dashboard that schools display on their like TVs in the hallway, right? So students can see it, and it's really fun to see these celebrations they put on as a result. So it's just a very fun product to work on, because it's all about rewards and celebrations. And so I love it. And I think that's why they've been able to recruit so many former educators, because it really does have such the data that we're able to pull, the impact we're able to have. And I think that's what's led to some of our really rapid growth over the last year and a half. And kudos to the marketing team. When I came in, what I was trying to do was tell those stories via case studies, because they just didn't really have case studies, right? And so I made it a huge initiative with our brand marketing manager, who was the dean of students up until he joined our company, to get that data for case studies. And we did webinars along with them too, to put these to really be able to show the impact that we have, especially in a tighter economic market. ESSER funds are expiring in ed tech, and so that really goes along with like just the economic conditions we're seeing everywhere. When you're able to pull data and show that impact, how it really impacts their quote unquote bottom line, like what principals are measured on, what superintendents are measured on, like that's how we're going to be able to grow our customer base, right? And keep our customers with us over the long term.
It's amazing when you have a company that's built around, a real clear and keen sense of what value means to different stakeholders and different people along the journey. And then that becomes kind of the infrastructure from which to build and then when you insert the power of gamification into this, right? It's just people want to play, people want to experience, and you've obviously hit something pretty good here.
And we actually, one of the marketing programs we just launched this last year is now gamifying usage by teachers and admins in our platform. So now they're getting points from us, and we have an online store they can redeem those points in. And so there's really fun t-shirts and mugs and pencils and stress balls, which students love. Like those are especially like stress balls, because a lot of students, like that just helps them focus, having something to like squeeze on. So those are really popular with their teachers. So these are all items they requested that we've now put in our store. So now we're trying to gamify that usage as well. And we're rolling out to our whole customer base this back to school, which I'm really excited for. But it was just received with really positive feedback. So it's been fun, not only that our product, that's what our product does, but now we're doing that to, as I mentioned, usage is a big goal. We want to increase usage. But the reason why we want to increase usage is we know that value for students exists when more teachers at the school are using it, and there's that level of consistency. So it drives our mission at the end of the day. And so that's a big focus of ours.
What is messaging typically? This is kind of more of a selfish request because I want to pass it on to my wife, but what does messaging strategy look like for schools that have fully embraced the idea of houses or some form of very manual gamification? So like I walk into their front office to like drop off lunch or something, and it's 4 columns of like little colors, right? So the idea and the understanding is there, but what is the messaging that illustrates the benefit of the tech?
So I mean, a huge part of like what we like, because you're right, like these systems exist in schools already. So like a lot of it were like one of our best performing emails was, I was just like, are you tracking behavior with like paper? And we got a huge open rate and just a ton of engagement, and then like demo requests that came through that translate to that revenue. So we focus a lot on moving off of paper-based tracking. That's a big part of what we do. But especially with house points, those are always our best performing campaigns, whether that's email, SEO, or social ads. And it's really like what we display often, especially with social ads, we just have a very visual, a very visual dashboard that shows those house points going up. So I just like put that, we have a GIF and it shows it, like it immediately clicks. So that kills it there. I put those in emails too, but I'm just usually like our email, it performs really well for us. And honestly, my, subject line being like, what's going to get people to open, obviously, I just try to be as literal as possible with it. So I don't try to like be cute or anything. I'm just like house points platform, and people, because we know that this is such a big need, that's like one of our best performing ones. Like I'm not trying to be, something with like Gryffindor, or like trying to bring in that Harry Potter.
No, because teachers are very matter of fact. You don't have 2 seconds to go to the bathroom. You don't need to
literally,
decipher a marketing message. And the funny thing with teachers, like other cult communities, is like, everybody, regardless of the United States, Canada, whatever, everyone's in the same boat. They struggle with the exact same thing. So it's kind of like, people like us do things like this.
Yeah, we're actually seeing a ton of growth in Australia right now, and I keep trying to convince the CEO and CFO that I need to go to Australia to do some research. They're not bought into that idea yet. Unfortunate. I'm going to call them out, but no. Yeah, exactly. Believe me, I'm trying. I know, but it's funny because we're seeing growth there, and then with a lot of international schools as well. And it's like behavior is universal, right? But house points, especially outside of the US, are so common. It's actually newer in the US to an extent, compared to like just other regions of the world. But yeah, I mean, it's especially with how, like, so what we do for, like, to answer your question, paper-based tracking, very little like digital house points or online house points, something like that, for those like messaging to really hit on that. But that's one part of it. The other huge part of our messaging, and we do that for like the reward store too, because that's really common. But a huge part of what I do is just put out those data pieces I mentioned. So like if I send an email that's like reduce referrals by 82%, and then I give the story of that school leader, does amazing, right? Like what that principal did to do it. Same thing with like a Facebook ad that says that, right? And we will take videos that we did from being on site with them too, where they're talking about that. But I just try to bring like the value to the very top, knowing like I don't have their attention for that long, as you mentioned, especially in education. You barely go to the bathroom during the day. It's like I'm, in 5 words, like I'm going to tell you exactly what we're offering here, and it performs incredibly well for us. So I think like specificity and just being literal and to the point, incredibly effective, and I think often overlooked in marketing, because I get so many marketing messages a day. I'm like, I don't even know what you're offering me. Like, this isn't providing me value, right? Like, and so constantly just being like, I'm not interested. Thanks.
I think that the stark reminder you're providing here is that regardless of the industry that you're in, and that you're directing your marketing activity towards, it's like reverse from a business case, ultimate customer centricity, get to the point, be about them, and exclude everything else. Don't put things behind these magnets. Think about intent. It's like that those truths can be applied to HVAC, plumbing, selling financial services, right? So
we're very clear on the problems we solve, right? Like there's this, we know those problems and we put those out there because we know people have them, right? So these problems, like we didn't just, not only do we solve them, but we built solutions for them because we knew, like based off of research, people have these challenges. But specificity is just like, and directness, I think, are incredibly important.
Do you, so I think I've mentioned to you before, our audience is made up of kind of, freelancers, agencies, vendors, and marketing leaders. And one of the sort of subcategories or topics that I try to draw on is, how do you build good marriages and partnerships between partners? Do you guys work with external partners, or is everything in-house? Do you have any experience that you can share in terms of what works great, what doesn't work great? What's your playbook on at least playing your role in that marriage?
Yes. So we actually work with a lot of outside vendors. We're a small team. So that's just, in a small company, really. So like we can't afford to like bring some of the stuff in-house. Like, for example, we just overhauled our website this year. It actually just finished. I finished up at about 2 a.m. last night, which I never worked that late, but I was like, I have to get it done. Like this cannot go on for another day. And it was one of the most successful website rebrands I've been a part of with an agency. And I have gone through this process probably 3 times now. Yeah, about 3 times to date. And at different companies, right? Obviously not. I've been here for a year and a half. If I redid the website 3 times, that'd be crazy. But that's so like over the course of my career. And this was by far the most successful. And I really think the reason is it owning I think when partnerships have fallen short with any, outside vendor agency I've worked with, is oftentimes due to a lack of clarity of my goals, right? And that's where the first breakdown is. So I know I have a challenge if it's a website or, a CRM implementation or whatever it is I'm doing. Like, it's really easy for me to just run to a vendor, have some budget and be like, hey, I need help with this. But it's not going to be successful unless I really take the time to understand, like, what exactly are my challenges, being so explicit, like on my goals, understanding, right, like how that relates to my revenue and everything, like building out that, like taking the time and slowing down to launch the project successfully. So when I go to vendors and agencies, I have such clear requirements that I'm looking for. They're able to fit, they're able to better meet me where I need to be met. I mean, obviously, not